December of 2017, the lid blew off the UFO topic. Now, even today, that might sound a little fringe, but the reality is, America's state-of-the-art top-secret military sensor systems on Navy aircraft, ships, our pilots, our reconnaissance satellites that comprise multiple cross-referenced data streams have confirmed unknown physical objects performing extraordinary feats of maneuverability. Movements in airframes that defy our current understanding of the laws of aerodynamics, even the laws of physics. In short, we are seeing evidence of technology and propulsion systems far beyond current capabilities, perhaps hundreds of years, even thousands of years beyond our grasp. In December 2017, the New York Times published a paradigm-busting story about the secret Pentagon program investigating these craft, and the former head of the program, Luis Elizondo. Today's UFOs, or UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, are not your tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theories of the past. The vehicles are real, not imagined. And Luis is truth-telling like no other. In interview after interview, he says the evidence is overwhelming, beyond compelling. Today, my guest host, Rocky Swanson, and I spoke with him about his service, his drive, and his intention. In 1 month, the U.S. government will release an unclassified report on UAP. What will it be like when tens of thousands turn into millions of people clamoring for the truth?
Greetings, sir. How are you?
Lou, how's it going?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good.
Great to see you.
Yes, sir. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm getting along just fine. And, I just briefly wanted to introduce my co-host for our little get-together here today. Rocky Swanson's a veteran from Afghanistan, and he's a deputy fire chief in Canada, and he was with the Canadian Forces. And,
fantastic. Rocky, thank you for your service, Rocky. I had the honor and privilege of working with a lot of the Canucks in Afghanistan in the early days, and I got to tell you, no kidding, you guys saved a lot of lives. We had the counter battery guys with those little, I guess they call them coyote trucks.
Yeah.
And really, saved our ass. Thank you very much. We had a chance to work with some of the regiments, some of the guys from Nova Scotia and whatnot. It was truly an honor and privilege. So, and now that you're a civilian working in the fire department, again, thank you for your service. It's humbly appreciated. So,
thank you, sir. It's an absolute pleasure to speak to you today. Sincerely.
So, I just wanted to kind of kick off the hour here with a kind of a group dynamic. How do we get here? And, like I mentioned, Rocky's a veteran. I went to military school as a little boy, and I've written a book on the American Revolution. Rocky and I, we happen to be on the administration team for the ATIP discussion cell on Facebook. And there's about 1,000 members there, but these are the committed of the committed, if you will, of folks that are following this topic. And, Louis, I just wanted to say that we have watched so many of your interviews, and I know I can, speak on behalf of Rocky and myself. We think that your courage and your bravery in terms of stepping up and talking about which could be one of the critical existential questions for humankind. And, we think that's a heroic choice that you've made to do this. And, I kind of thought the other day, this is almost like the series of essays that were passed to get the Constitution of the United States passed, the Federalist, where you have these series of interviews, Louis, that you've been doing, and there's a common thread through these interviews that talk about the phenomenon. Some of the content that I found particularly interesting was your family's background and your father being involved in the Bay of Pigs incident. And so I just wanted to, say if you wanted to discuss any of that and how you kind of find yourself here today.
Yeah, Byron, well, whatever you and Rocky want to discuss, please. I tell everybody, I don't need to know ahead of time. I don't want to know ahead of time. I prefer real discussion, real dialogue. I don't like contrived debate. I think for me, this is very important. You mentioned something earlier about bravery and courage. And there's times, to be honest with you, my family would probably argue that, look at me and say probably more stupidity. This has not been an easy journey on my family and myself, but I will tell you what makes it worth it is when I get to engage people like you and Rocky on a serious topic that I feel very committed to, and I get to have the opportunity to have dialogue with people who want to know the truth. At the end of the day, Byron, my perspective is very simple. Whatever it is, we need to find out. And unfortunately, there are people that just simply don't want to have that conversation. And there's not a whole lot I can do to change their mindset, but I want to thank you guys for taking this topic seriously. Whatever, I don't know honestly what your position or opinion is on it, and I respect whatever it may be ahead of time. So whether you agree or disagree with me, I think that's fine, and I think we can always agree to disagree. I think that's what healthy debate is about. But even talking about this topic, I think is 3 years ago, I'm not sure we would have been able to resonate with the individuals that this topic is now resonating with. And I do think we're at a watershed moment. But I cannot take I can't take credit for that because this is a group effort. If it's not for people like you and Rocky having the conversation within your spheres, one voice gets drowned out in a big crowd. And I think what makes this different is that we are at a moment where people such as yourselves are taking the topic seriously, whatever your opinion is, one way or the other, and are willing to have an honest scientific debate, an academic debate about it. And I'm looking at you right now and I see all these books behind you, and I realize that you're obviously a learned man, whatever position you might be taking on this topic. So that's all I can ask for. I'm not asking for people to agree with my position. I'm just simply asking people to think. And if at the end of the day they actually are thinking about this topic, then I think I've succeeded in my mission. At times I feel like I'm taking on the entire U.S. government with this conversation,
right? And
it can get overwhelming very, very quickly. But what allows me to keep doing it is when I have a conversation with people like you and Rocky. That gives me the energy and the courage to continue doing it and to continue getting myself with arrows, shot in me all the time, because I think we deserve the truth, whatever that truth is. I think we're, the people of the United States and the people of Canada deserve to know. I was just telling Rocky, I had the honor and privilege of serving with some of your countrymen in combat in some really difficult, nasty situations. And at the end of the day, whether you're Canadian or from the United States, I've said this before, we're all American. If you look at the hemisphere of the Americas, once you remove the lines, you realize we're all connected. We're all the same. And whether you're North American, South American, Central American, we're all Americans.
Right.
And, I think this is a conversation that pertains to all of us. And this is why I feel so committed to having these types of engagement. And, I tell people all the time, I'm not always right. I'm a human, exactly like you, exactly like Rocky, exactly like your kids and your wife and your brothers and sisters. I just happen to have the privilege of being in a position for a while where I had access to certain information and observations, and to the best of my ability, without getting myself in trouble and going to jail. I think it's worth having that conversation. And that's,
so one of the things that Rocky and I have spoken about before, and some of the folks on the administration team, is we understand the need for the secrecy on this topic in the context of national security. And, the United States government, the military, they're not really obligated to be in the education business. They're in the business of protecting lives. And, when you consider the strained Cold War, the anxieties that were going on in the Cold War, the idea of releasing these unknowns into the zeitgeist of the planet, saying what we do know and what we do not know, that would actually, potentially make our position more vulnerable in the context of our adversaries. And it really comes down to saving lives. And would it have been irresponsible to release so many unknowns out into the world? And so we get that. And I think that a lot of the folks in the disclosure business and the ufology business, they don't really understand that the ultimate mission of the military and the national security apparatus is to save lives and to protect the national security. And so being promiscuous with information potentially it limits that mission. But so getting onto your role in ATIP, Luis, when you accepted the position at ATIP and eventually began to lead the organization, how would you steer the course of the agency and the investigations differently than your predecessor? I mean, what was the Elizondo stamp of leadership?
Sure. Well, boy, you're asking a couple good questions here. So first of all, let me answer a specific question you have. What was the difference between the way I decided to manage the effort versus my predecessor? First of all, my predecessor was better than me in every regard. His name has now been leaked. I'm not going to say it because he's asked me not to bring him into the public eye. But he was smarter than me. He was more informed than me. He was in every way probably at the time managing it better than anybody could have. The problem is that he was facing forces at the time that were really, really influential and powerful. And so when I took over, all I simply did was learn from those lessons of what didn't work and avoid those landmines. Unfortunately, it took him stepping on those landmines and paying the professional personal price for me to make sure I didn't step on those landmines. I didn't manage ATIP any better. In fact, probably I would argue he probably did a much better job managing OSAP and the early part of ATIP than I did. I just used my counterintelligence training to then take the program and protect it. Counterintelligence and security, it's all about protecting organizations. And knowing the visceral response that some of the elements in the Pentagon had, I chose to run to some degree, and this is going to be, I'm sure people are going to read into this the wrong way, but I chose to run this a bit like a counterintelligence operation where you compartmentalize the hell out of it. Think of an onion with many different layers, right? And not everybody gets to see the inside of the layer. And so you build these layers of protection to make sure that those external forces that were resisting this topic couldn't influence it in a negative way. And so that's the first thing. The second thing you asked me is about my leadership style. First of all, anybody who tells you that they're a leader probably doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. A leader never tells you that they're a leader. Okay, a leader is judged by those who have to serve with him or her, and it's judged by their actions and deeds, not words. One of the things that I think defines a leader is you never say I, me, or mine. It's always us, we, and ours.
Very
Victories are joint. Okay, so if anybody says I'm a leader and these are the qualities of a leader, you may want to watch out. I never considered myself a leader. I never called myself a leader. I was always a colleague. I was always a coworker. I was always a friend. I prefer to do things that way because I think consensus is important. Ultimately, the responsibility fell on my shoulders to make decisions, but I never made those decisions in a vacuum. I always had my folks come up, and everybody was always handpicked in most of the jobs I've had. And I did that for a reason, because I knew these people would tell me what I needed to hear and not what I wanted to hear. And that is important. There are times, when you have a collective consensus on something, you're getting a lot more perspectives. And I'm a smart enough man to realize I'm not smart. And so making sure I have the right talent there to help allow me to make an informed decision is critical. It's important. It's the only reason why I'm sitting here having this conversation with you today is because I had the opportunity and blessings of working with some of the finest human beings in our national security apparatus. I didn't do it by myself. This was a joint effort, and the credit goes to these folks. And many of these folks are still now working and are associated with the current UAP task force. So for me, that's a measure of success. That the system still has faith and confidence in their talents, where they're still working in that type of capacity.
So Rocky, you have a question.
Yeah, Lou, I'm no war hero or anything like that, but I was a soldier, and I recognize
I'm not a war hero either.
no,
So,
no. Well, I think that some of us you are, and I recognize the real deal when I see it. I can say I've got the experience to say that, you know, and so when you first came out and started talking about this, I was paying attention pretty quickly, and you know, you had a distinct ring to what you were saying that I recognized as competent and truthful. And so going back to when you first started speaking publicly about this, you mentioned on a number of occasions that one of the impetus, or part of the reason that you decided to resign, was that you could not get the information you wanted to pass in the way that you wanted to pass it up to the right members in the chain of command. And I completely understand that on the official sense, but having, you know, been a soldier, you know, I kind of wonder, didn't anybody ever try to put a note in an ice cube at a dinner party or something and pass information up? You know, was there not, I don't mean to make light of that, but I'm saying, was there not the urge or the means to somehow get something passed up so that, you know, it seems incredibly isolated, like the general is isolated to the point where it's dangerous. You know, this information, it must be, I mean, you left over this, that information must be critical. So was there no way to pass that, you know, to get that information?
Put it simply, there was a way, but it would not be consistent with the ethos that the general embodies. You know, let's put it this way. I've had the honor and privilege of serving with General Mattis. And this is a man who is there to make the system work and be better. By me circumventing that process to make the process better, you don't break the law to prevent the law being broken.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm not saying this is really a law, but this is the same type of thing. And so it is known for us as part of our military discipline is that if you can't fix a problem inside, don't break the chain of command. You just leave. And that's why you have my resignation memo, the way it is, addressed specifically to the Secretary of Defense. That was my way of saying, look, boss, now I'm a civilian. Now you know what's going on, because now the bureaucracy can't stop it. And I'm not breaking the chain of command, because I don't have a chain of command at this point. My loyalty is to you. And let's not forget that Jim Mattis did very, very much almost exactly the same thing I did almost a year after I left. He could not fix the system he was trying to fix with the current administration that he was part of, and so he resigned. This is something that is it's I know it's unusual for a lot of civilians to think of that way. They say, hey, can't you just, you know, go to a cocktail party and whisper in somebody's ear?
Yeah.
Yes, I can, but that's not the right way to do it. I had committed nearly several decades of my life to supporting an organization and institution that demands loyalty. And even if it's at your own detriment, and when I could no longer serve the king, so to speak, the way that he needed to be served, I had to do what I had to do. I had to leave the very department that I love so much to fix it. And I don't expect everybody to understand that. I'll share something else with you that I have never shared publicly, but until I left the government, I never voted. And people, of course, say, "Oh my gosh, that's terrible! You know, it's your constitutional right. You should vote." Well, and I understand that, but from my perspective, in the capacity that I was working in as a public servant, I never wanted to look the boss in the eye and say, "I voted for you, boss," or "I didn't vote for you." Right. It didn't matter to me. What mattered is that the people voted for that person to be in charge, and that's where my faith and allegiance goes to. Is whatever the people decide. That is my priority, and I abstained from the political process deliberately because I never wanted to be compromised emotionally or any other way. And of course, now that I'm no longer employed with the U.S. government in that capacity, I'll vote and I'll scream and I'll yell. But when I was in that capacity, I didn't, and it's because of my commitment to the American people and the institutions that we have put our faith into. Yeah. I never wanted to corrupt that, even if it was a matter of voting. And again, people are going to argue with me right now. They're going to hear this and say, "Lou, you're crazy," but it's just my personal feeling. And I never wanted to be.
When you wanted to face the commander in chief, you wanted to be clear. I mean,
Yeah.
if your orders sprang down from the commander in chief on down, you wanted to be
Yeah.
clear that you weren't for or against him, that you were serving his interests. I mean,
Right.
that's
The
the purest.
Secretary of Defense,
Yeah.
his authorities are derived by the president. The DNI's authorities are derived by the president. They are a reflection. They are appointees by the president.
Right.
And I did not want to violate that promise I made many years ago, is to serve the American people through whatever capacity they choose, and that's really the reason why. So
just as the agency, Luis, ramped up its investigations, was there a thing where everywhere you looked internally through the labyrinth of government, there were cases upon cases, or did the cases kind of trickle in? Cases finding you, maybe not infrequently, but rare, maybe once a month. Could you talk about the data flow just in
Yes.
general terms?
Yeah, it was a bit like a thunderstorm. There would be days where we had opportunities to do our other assigned jobs and other functions, and then there'd be days it's just mass chaos. You're getting 3 and 4 reports coming in from separate or sometimes similar sources, and it's all hands on deck. And there wasn't a normal battle rhythm, as we like to say, or op tempo. It was a lot of it was being on react mode. I want to be careful to say not all of it was reactionary. There was some proactive efforts on our side, but a lot of it was waiting for the information to come in, and then you had a very short period of time to ascertain, okay, are we dealing with something conventional, or are we truly dealing with something that falls within that phenomenon type category? And if it does, where to come from, where is it now, where is it going, who else is involved, right? And what are the military assets and intelligence assets that we could leverage to collect more information? So there wasn't a steady battle rhythm, but I will tell you in that same vein that these incidents never stopped. They're continuing to this day. And that, I think, for me, is why this is such a national security concern, without fear mongering and getting people all excited that,
Sure.
Because people oftentimes, I think, they hear a soundbite that I say and they misconstrue, and they all of a sudden say, oh, Lou's weaving this threat narrative. No, I'm not. But from a national security perspective, there is a potential threat. And I don't think anybody will argue that. As a human, obviously I have other feelings as well.
Right.
But like you said in the beginning of this conversation, national security isn't about feelings. It's about fact and data and protecting the American people. And it's not necessarily about satisfying the idle curiosity of people.
That's right.
It's not an academic endeavor. It is a national security endeavor.
Right.
And so if you want an academic endeavor, then you get the National Science Foundation involved with some of these other folks and make it an academic endeavor. But until that happens, it's a national security issue.
So Rocky, you had a question?
Yeah, well, first of all, Lou, I really appreciate your answer on the last one about passing on information. I find it difficult to articulate that to my civilian friends, why it is so difficult to pass information on sometimes. And I mean, I understood clearly where you were coming from. So thank you. I have a question for you that's a little bit different. And it's just something I've been wondering is, a few times yourself and others recently, former government members have spoken about evidence that was quote unquote unmistakable in that it wasn't ours necessarily. And so, and whether that be a photo or video or a collection of all kinds of data, but when you put that in together in your thoughts and you realize that this is something that is possibly not ours, is there not a profound feeling, or what is that like to go to work in the morning and have that, in your thoughts?
Surprisingly enough, I think you're about to find out. I think as more people get socialized to this idea, people, you're seeing it right now. There's this aha moment, but after a while, there's this steady realization that we're dealing with something that we haven't really thought about much before, and that it's real, and there's all sorts of possibilities. But I think as people become increasingly socialized to that notion, there's more of this easy acceptance. And I don't want to say it ever became routine, because people say, how can you, oh my gosh, how can this just be routine for you? But you get to a point where, how many times do you look up at the stars and say, wow, that's beautiful? And then how many people really contemplate, you're looking at objects that are millions of light years away. Some of them aren't even in existence anymore, right? You're talking, some of those little points of light are entire galaxies, right?
Right.
And yet there's this almost benign realization that, you know, the universe is pretty big, and you just kind of get accustomed to it. I know it sounds, again, I know this sounds terrible for some people. They're going to say, you know, how you're diminishing the value of all this, you know, this incredible knowledge and research and work that's been done in this topic. I'm not. I think what I'm doing is describing the human condition. Once we realize, once you sail over the horizon of the ocean, and you realize that a lot of the proverbial sea monsters that were described to us are really just parts of nature, right? There are great white sharks and blue whales and giant squid in the Pacific, but they're no longer monsters. They're
Right.
just part of our natural environment. And there have been other moments in time, just like this, where, for example, Copernicus or Galileo had proposed that the Earth was not the center of the solar system. And that was a seismic event for a lot of people, and they refused to believe it. In fact, they wouldn't even look through Galileo's telescope. They refused to, because it contradicted their narrative and their philosophy. And yet here we are now, a few hundred years later, and we kind of laugh at that, kind of chuckle. You know, why were people afraid of that? Why? That's just normal. And I suspect this conversation may very well turn out to be like that. What maybe for us right now is this roller coaster ride of, oh my gosh, you know, the universe maybe is a lot more complex and bigger than we thought, and our place in it, we're going to start to question. This isn't new. This happens in our, as a species, constantly. It may not happen in every one of our lifetimes, but if you look over the history of mankind, this happens constantly. And this is part of our evolutionary process, and it shouldn't be feared. It should be embraced. I think with every one of these revelations comes new opportunity.
So,
Yeah.
Louis, you went through a period of serious transition when you resigned. It's kind of a huge inflection point in your life. And I know how serious you take your oath. I've taken an oath before to protect and support and defend the Constitution as well. And I think it's pretty amazing how the mission, as you understood it, began to transcend the traditional avenues of power, so to speak, that you were frustrated by. And the mission went global and it went popular. And, you know, so obviously there's a constant balancing act between the needs of national security and the higher aspirations of humankind. But, you know, what happened in your understanding of this phenomenon as you experienced it that acted to fundamentally change your life, not changing you, but making you bigger and broader in this mission?
You know, I think it's always been my commitment to mission, whether it's in the battlefields of Afghanistan or in the hallways of Congress or the Pentagon. You know, my commitment is to the people. When I took an oath, it was to the people of the United States. That's where my loyalty, my allegiance lies. And ultimately, lest we forget that it is government's job to serve the people, not the other way around. And so I think when I look at this topic and I compare it to other things, so for example, it's no secret that countries have nuclear weapons. What is a secret is how those nuclear weapons work. Well, the fact that there are these UAPs in our controlled airspace shouldn't be a secret. It's the same approach, same logic. How can you say the fact that something exists is secret? No, that's not secret. What's secret is sources and methods. What secrets are the applications and the methodologies behind that. I get that, and that's what we should protect. But for humanity to be not only not told the truth, but worse, that there's an active campaign to suppress even the conversation, to me is very dangerous. That to me reminds me of the days of propaganda, and where governments forget that what their job is to do is to represent the people. When governments no longer have the best interest of the people, those governments are on limited time. And I don't ever want that to be the case with my government. And I want our people to have faith and confidence in our government, because most of the people in our government are good people. They're doing their jobs, they're patriots, they want to help, they want to do the right thing. Unfortunately, there are certain small pockets, small elements in the government that don't see things that way. And so my argument, my issue is really with them. It's not with the government, and it's certainly not with the people. It's the mindset of some people feeling that they should be able to control a narrative because the world or people aren't ready to have that conversation. Well, that's not their decision to make. That's our decision to make as a people. And to me, that subverts, it perverts the very institutions that we have established to reflect our interests and benefit us. And so that's where my issue lies. And yes, it has been a very, very difficult, as you say, transition for me. You know, I'm a creature of the shadows. I don't like the spotlight. People are when they meet me for real, they're very surprised to know that I'm an introvert. I don't seek the attention. And unfortunately, I find myself in the very situation where that's the only way I can really help this effort, this endeavor. It's not comfortable for me. I definitely don't seek it out. That's just a reason why I live in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming. Right. That's just not the way I am. But you know, until the government decides to put somebody else and say, okay, this is now the guy who's going to take this seriously, which by the way they're starting to do. You know, I find myself in a situation where I really don't have a choice. And it's important that we have dialogue, because ultimately it's going to be people that are much smarter than me, much smarter than us, to figure this out. You know, my job was, you know, maybe putting a crack in the dam and letting some of that water flow so people know, oh, there's water behind that big concrete wall that we've been living behind. But it's not me who's going to break the dam. It's honestly, Byron, it's folks like you and Rocky, because you're reaching an audience, a certain demographic that wants to know the truth. And look, there's a lot of people out there that don't. There are a lot of people that'd rather take the blue pill and you know, live life with fantasy football and reality TV shows and things like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there's another segment of society that is you know, they have these intellectual pursuits to know the truth. And I don't think we can suppress the truth any longer. I think it's becoming an increased liability for us by keeping a cork on this topic, because the evidence is overwhelming. And at some point, it's going to work against the government's interest. At some point, we're at critical mass. Everybody knows it's real. And for some reason, the government is still keeping it secret. Well, then it becomes that shield that you're using to protect yourself or the government with now becomes a sword, and is now, you know, it's cutting you,
right?
Because you've held on to the secret too long, and now people don't trust you because
Rocky,
now people
Rocky, you had a question.
Yeah, Lou, you know, it's interesting. There's some parallels here, just to thinking about the subject in general. A few years back, you know, I was speaking with my brother about this subject, and he's an intelligence member of the intelligence community like yourself, and he and I were talking about, is there anybody, do you think, really in the Pentagon that, you know, for real looks into the UAP issue or UFOs? And we would go back and forth saying, yeah, there must be. I mean, it just seems like obvious that there must be someone. How could it not be? But we would go back and forth on this. And so the parallel I make to that is that, I mean, now, you know, shortly after that conversation, I see a picture of you in the newspaper, you know, looking out the window of a cafe, and the rest of, you know, us in the world found out that there you were, you existed. And so, you know, it should have seemed kind of obvious to us that there must be people in the Defense Department taking this seriously. And so looking at some of the cases that we know about, when we hear statements from pilots and people like yourself, and we look at the data, and assuming that the data that we've been presented so far, or that we think we know about, is accurate, it would seem rather obvious that some of these things really cannot be ours, that we're not alone. I mean, it seems like that to me. And is that not perplexing to you at this point still, that others in the greater scientific community haven't really looked at it that way?
No, I you know, historically, science, there's two extremes. There are the individuals that look at this topic, and I guess you'd call them in the ufology community, that are way off the spectrum, out in the middle of nowhere, and they They are part of the, if you will, the fringe elements where they have all these interesting narratives about where these things are from, et cetera.
Right.
Then on the opposite side of that spectrum, you have those that, will shroud themselves in the spirit of science, but they don't execute the will of science. They will hide behind science and say that this is impossible, when really in reality the spirit of science is to question everything. Yeah. And that even means your own scientific principles, right? And have things peer reviewed and tested and whatnot in the scientific methodology. No, I'm not surprised, because science has historically, once it has a position, is very hard to change. If you talk to any astrophysicist out there, they'll tell you all these horror stories when Stephen Hawking was trying to propose his theories on black holes, and Einstein will tell you the same thing. Science becomes a bit of a cult in itself, that once there are established principles, it is very, very hard to get fellow scientists to consider anything else. And therein lies part of the problem. And so I think taking a measured, deliberate, purposeful look at this, recognizing where we have to challenge our own beliefs sometimes, and our own, even sometimes our methodologies. We make mistakes all the time. One can look at the intelligence community and say, well, this represents the epitome of smart people doing good work, but we make mistakes too. I mean, there's points in time where no matter how much data you have, it's not enough. And what do I mean by that? Well, September 11th, we had the information, but we didn't share it, and bad things happened. Unfortunately, horrible things happened. The initial predicate for invading Iraq war and weapons of mass destruction, we were sure they had them, and you know what? We were wrong. So I think we have to always be mindful of that, and hubris. I think it's part of the human condition, and we have to be very, very mindful and pay attention to the fact that we are an arrogant species, and we pride ourselves in knowing things, and sometimes we have to take a step back and even challenge our own notions of what we consider is real or authentic versus anything else. And by the way, for the record, I think healthy skepticism is important. Yeah, it's important in any endeavor like this. I don't fault the skeptics. I think I have an issue with people who is a skeptic versus someone who takes a skeptical approach.
Sure.
Right. Someone who's a skeptic is by nature somebody who, no matter what information you present to them, they're not going to believe. So at that point, they're just as guilty as the fringe, as far as I'm concerned, because they're stuck to their narrative. Someone who takes a skeptical approach, who's always playing the devil's advocate and wanting alternative analysis, that I respect, that I appreciate.
Well, you have to work against confirmation bias if you ever really want to, hit the truth. I mean, because we all want to be biased in our confirmations, I mean, that's our tendency.
No, Byron, you're right. And this is, one of the reasons. I'll share with you another thing that probably I know half your listeners are going to probably want to throw tomatoes at the screen right now. But if you ask me what one of my missions is, personal goals is to destroy ufology as we know it. I think we have had a lot of internal issues in the study of this topic because ufology in itself seems to go down these preconceived narratives. And because of that, we tend to blind ourselves to new information. I see it all the time, these cults of personalities. And I'm not going to name a few because I'm sure that probably they think the same of me. But that's why I don't offer my opinion, because in ufology, it's fraught full of opinion. And those opinions kind of morph into what they think are facts. And that's very dangerous. I think we need to avoid that at all costs. And that's why one of my private missions is to take this notion of what we call ufology, obliterate it into a billion pieces. And hopefully what comes back and coalesces is something far more objective and scientifically focused and minded. And then now more people can come into this interesting field of study, because it is fascinating.
So speaking to that, in May 2021, we're on the cusp of this government report that's slated to be released. I don't think there's any details as to how many pages it's going to be, what's going to be in it, et cetera. And as you've mentioned in past interviews, it's a Herculean task in 180 days to get this kind of thing together. But, there's maybe like 10,000 committed adherents to ufology, as we were just talking about, UAP geeks, whatever. What's that going to be like in 3 months? after the government report breaks the lid off even further, what happens when hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of people are clamoring for the truth, clamoring to solve the mystery when, Lou, as you've stated in the past, all options are on the table? I mean, we just came through a year in which half the country thought the virus came from Bill Gates. So I mean, when we have millions of people clamoring for the truth about what this reality is, I mean,
Right.
What does that look like? I mean, you're building the bricks in that revelatory wall, if you will. I mean, that's being sprung on the planet.
Wow. First of all, you give me way too much credit. I think it's a joint effort. I think we are collectively putting the bricks together. This is why it's important that the ufology that we knew is blown out of the water, because as we have a moral responsibility here, as more people begin to come under the tent. If this 180-day report really is revelatory, and people recognize, oh, crap, this is real and serious, there is a responsibility for people to have an elevated intellectual conversation about this without going down these rabbit holes. This is not about, hey, this is what I tell people, this is not about you. This is about us. Stop making this topic about you.
Right.
It has nothing to do with you. I don't care if you think you're an abductee, or you've been victimized by this, or you are an experiencer, or whatever nom de jour you want to use. Stop looking at this from a selfish perspective. This involves all of humanity. Stop making this about you. It's not about me, that's for damn sure. And so this is, we're all carrying the torch here. And so I think we need to be prepared to have a, I got this conversation from Chris Mellon, and he's absolutely right. Ufology isn't a conversation. This topic isn't a conversation like Star Trek. This conversation is more like having a somber conversation with somebody about cancer. And the good news is that there's a cure for this cancer. But this is a very serious conversation that we need to approach it, delicately and very matter of fact, which is what people, I think, deserve and expect. And this is why I have such issues with the way some people have treated this topic over the years, because instead they've turned into their personal cottage industry.
Yep.
And it's not about that. This is you're going down the way of Jim Jones, and that's not religion. That's cult. And
Right.
that's what it does. It soils the honest study and research into a very important, what may be one of mankind's most important topics since we've been walking on two legs. And
Absolutely.
so that is the danger that I see in the current landscape, and why I work so hard trying to have conversations like this with people such as yourselves, where the only agenda is the truth. It's not to make a buck. It's not to sell a book or sell a ticket to some sort of, get together where I'm going to tell you, what I know about UFOs, because I don't. I've got a lot more questions than I have answers, but that's okay, because we're dealing with a topic that is perhaps one of the greatest enigmas of mankind. And for anybody to claim they have the answers, there's been a lot of people in the past that have made those same type of claims, and history has proven they really didn't know too much.
Rocky, you had a question?
Yeah, Lou, you mentioned that you're a private person and that being in the spotlight isn't your thing. I get it. Like I'm actually shaking right now just being on camera. I don't.
You and me both.
Yeah, I retired as a warrant officer in 2016, and I try to avoid the camera at all costs. And so I have to ask you, and I've been wondering this for a while. Did you realize when you came out on this that you were going to likely be a worldwide name for the rest of your life? And I hope that didn't just depress you, but like
Actually,
sorry, J. Allen Hynek. We all know his name.
We lost Lou's video there.
Oh, no.
Okay,
I apologize.
I thought my question just made you say to hell with it.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I have my phone on do not disturb, and it unfortunately never stops ringing. No, I never thought I'd be a household name. I never wanted to be a household name. That wasn't my motivation. Frankly, I was hoping somebody else would have picked up the torch by now.
Yeah.
and I could just have faded off into the sunset. I keep looking over my shoulder, waiting for, the cavalry to arrive. It is very tough on me, and of course, people from the outside, I'm sure they look at it and say, "Oh no, must be great," and people recognize you, but they recognize me for the wrong reasons. They
Right.
recognize me because I'm that UFO guy,
Right.
not Luis Elizondo. And it's my identity has been wrapped around really just a job I didn't ask for, a job that I was told to do, and I did the best that I could. But I didn't do anything special. I didn't do anything that anybody else would do, like you, Rocky, or Byron, or anybody in your audience. I just did the best with what I had. And that doesn't make me extraordinary in any ways. In fact, I tell people I'm an unextraordinary man living through extraordinary times. It just turns out that when the music stopped, there were no more chairs for me to sit in. But I'm not exceptional. I'm not extraordinary. I'm actually painfully average, and in some cases probably below average. I find it tough, and especially the attacks on my family, particularly my kids. They're social media people. I try to stay off it as much as possible. I use it for work and communicating, but they really take it personally when people come out and accuse me of things
Right.
that they have no basis in those accusations. They have no idea who I am or what I stand for, and it hurts them the most because they're my kids. They know who I am. They know what I'm about. And I can't necessarily defend myself publicly because there's some delicacies here that I have to. I don't mean delicacies from a eating perspective. I mean delicate issues that I have to be cognizant of because I still have my non-disclosure authority. I'm still very much involved with without going into detail, helping the government figure this out, and I won't go into any more than that. And then of course you have public affairs statements that come out, and they're frankly quite contradictory and inaccurate.
Yeah.
But if I make too much noise, then I run the risk of losing the momentum we've already made over the last 3 years, and I don't want that to happen. We've come too far collectively to allow that to happen. So, I guess my temporary solution is to sit there and take the arrows, just occasionally wince here and there, while having this conversation and getting our foreign countries involved, and getting the media involved, and getting the public involved, and getting our legislators involved, and getting our executive branch involved, and trying to work this effort in as much of a constructive way as I can. I don't want to be a distraction.
So Luis, we've obviously listened to many of your interviews and studied them, and wanted to avoid being incredibly duplicative. But you've said in some of the interviews that there were radar returns that were decades old that detail movement by UAP at high rates of speed, 10,000 miles an hour, et cetera. And we know that there are several more recent cases, like the Nimitz encounter, with cross-referenced data streams, pilot eyewitness, Aegis radar, gun camera footage, maybe even satellite radar, satellite imagery that correlate. So, are there 5 cases with this redundant data confirmation, timestamp, and in sync? Or are there many more than that, with more than 3 data streams showing the 5 observables? Is it like
many more?
Many
more. I can't discuss exact numbers, but it's overwhelming. It's beyond compelling, and that's why.
And as an investigator, those data streams obviously have timestamps, and you can articulate that into one illustration of the event.
Correct.
That's the
and there are efforts.
I mean,
exactly. And there are efforts underway to do that, to visualize that data and be able to look at from a temporal aspect events as they occur. And as the reports coming in, using a lot of the same methodology you do in hunting terrorists, right? You're trying to find, using a poor analogy, you're looking through the white noise to find what it is you're looking for, or the needle in the haystack. But if you know what a needle looks like, it makes it a lot easier, right? And so that's where those observables come in, and then being able to apply the technical capabilities and other capabilities to then find that needle for you and see where that needle's going, where it's coming from, where it's going, what it's doing, That's absolutely correct. And
And some of that,
there's a lot.
Some of that noise, you know, you've mentioned the crown jewels being the nuclear portfolio. I think probably lesser known crown jewels would be the satellite fleet.
I cannot talk about that
Okay.
at all. Byron, I totally respect
all right.
your question, and I'm not trying to be evasive here, but
No,
I do have to be very mindful. If other people want to have that conversation, that's certainly on them, but I cannot talk about our technical capabilities as it relates to what we might or might not be using or have.
Very good. Rocky, you had a question that kind of goes down the same path a little bit.
Sort of I'll modify my question, I think, because I don't want to get into the satellites or anything like that. But what I will say or ask, Lou, is referencing, let's say, signals intelligence. I realize you also will not be able to speak about SIGINT. However, I'm using that term to describe emissions of any kind. So we've heard pilots and others say that perhaps there was active jamming from one of these objects. Active meaning that there was something irradiating from the object, not necessarily directed at intentionally, but nevertheless, there was some kind of interference. Is there anything that you can talk about in regards to that kind of emission, or is there a waste byproduct from these, you know, that is measurable?
Sure. That's a great question. So I think you're referring specifically to what we refer as ELINT and MASINT, electronics intelligence and
exactly, yeah.
Measurement intelligence. And if you know what you're looking for, again, signatures, right? Then you can collect that data. And without going into too much detail, what I will tell you is that there are efforts to use some of these other capabilities to try to collect additional information and greater fidelity. What I can't do is tell you precisely what those capabilities look like and what they're doing and how we're using them or how they're using them. But what I can say is, you know, that's all part of signature. So let's go back to the original conversation we had about the wonderful Canadians I had the privilege to serve with. They had a vehicle, a truck called a Coyote truck. Actually, that's what they called it. And at night, the bad guys would like to mortar us and rocket us. And the one thing that this truck was able to do was because as a mortar round goes into the air, it strips away the ions of the atmosphere enough where you can detect the ionization. And because of that and some other signatures like sound, you can triangulate where these mortars are originating from and being fired upon you. And so these trucks, in very short order, were able to very quickly counter battery, very quickly identify the location of where these bad guys were trying to shoot us from. And then it allowed us to go and defend ourselves, right, and neutralize those threats. So very much the same way, the same capabilities that you might find in one of these trucks saving troops on the ground, you know, there could be potentially some application there if you know what you're looking for, if you know what those signatures are, to collect information. But that's a very real example of those type of capabilities being used in the combat field to save lives. It works. That's my point.
I find it, sorry, I just have to say that it's interesting that you're referencing the Coyote. I began my career in a Coyote reconnaissance squadron, and
no kidding.
I did not serve in Afghanistan in that capacity, but I know the vehicle well.
Well, that's all right, man. You guys saved our ass. I'll tell you, we all slept a hell of a lot better around that truck. That's for damn sure.
I'm gonna pass on your words to those boys. Yeah,
please. They did God's work, man. They were incredible.
Right on.
So, Louis, the recent New Yorker piece, lengthy article that just came out on April 30th, you know, it mentions a lieutenant colonel encountering a 40-foot long white tic tac, exactly the object from the Nimitz encounter that Captain Fravor talks about. And this is striking because it begins to fit into kind of a classification frame, right? Which is to say consistent reoccurring object types. Is it safe to assume that there's a myriad of consistent classifications of object types featuring potentially different performance characteristics, roles, purposes, or even consistencies in the different scenarios where and when these object types are encountered? Has that classification been?
Byron, you are absolutely on the right track. That was the general consensus that we had, is that that vehicle size, shape may be consistent with their mission, whatever those missions are, performance characteristics, and maybe a derivative even of their design characteristics, i.e. potential propulsion and intended use. So yeah, that's absolutely correct. I haven't really discussed that publicly, but that's a great question, and that's absolutely 100% correct.
And one of the other things, one of the other things you raised in a recent interview was you felt like some of the scientists are beginning to unpack how it works. You know, going to the sort of binary purpose, which is, you know, what is it and how does it work? And as amateur historians, as amateurs, you know, following this topic, Rocky and I, we've seen a lot of the scientific papers that have been released. Of course, you have the papers in the public domain talking about warp drives and things like this. You know, would you say that what is being gravitated towards, pun intended, what is being gravitated towards in terms of finding out how this thing works, ticks and ties with some of those public documents about warp drives and warp space and this and that, or is there something totally exotic that's being unpacked as well?
I think no. I think a lot of it can be found in the dirt, but there's, you know, give me a second. I'm going to show you something here. Give me 1 second. Pull it off my bookshelf. Forgive me. I do not have a comprehensive, if you will, bookshelf like you have, but I do have some. This is one that's on my bookshelf, and it's a very interesting book. I don't know how publicly available it is, but it was written by folks. Burt Rattan did the forward. It's called Frontiers of Propulsion Science. It's a nice, heavy, thick, weighty book.
It's a thick book.
It's a very thick book, and if you look in it, it's fraught full of mathematical computation. So if you want some good reading and you love mathematics, this is one. But it was also written by Eric Davis, and Hal Puthoff has some stuff in here. And these are the type of books where you start beginning to potentially unlock gravity. What does gravity mean? How does it work? How does it affect things? You know, I guess the vernacular warp drives and things like that. But there's real science behind it. There's real mathematics, real scientific modeling. It's not science fiction. It's just really advanced physics. That's all. And I'm certainly not smart enough nor qualified to talk as articulate as they are. But there's a lot of literature available that's been around, if you know where to look, that really has some pretty good ideas of what we may be dealing with. And so we have a few more minutes left. I think it would be remiss if I didn't mention some of the more I don't know, exploratory angles that you've talked about in some of your past interviews, what in the ufology community is referred to as high strangeness. You know, you cited a 1970s novel, Chains of the Sea, that have these different interests, sort of these protagonists orbiting around each other. You've got the artificial intelligence, you've got the alien intelligences, you've got the human intelligences, and it kind of confines humanity's role in sort of almost like a bystander type of a role. And just, you know, reflecting on your comments about our narrow field of view in the context of the universe, we maybe perceive 1% of the universe, that there's just as much macro above us as there is micro below us, you know, that we have this very narrow purview. You know, I just wanted to open it up for all three of us to just maybe talk about that concept of all options on the table, because you've repeated that over and over. And I know that traditionally, as binary creatures, as cardio-social creatures, as you mentioned, you know, we want to look at things in a bilateral way as being on or off, Republican, Democrat, rich, poor, up, down, etc. And so we think humans and then aliens are over here, and they come here, and it's this kind of like, you know, chess game or you know, checkers, when in reality we're in three-dimensional chess mode, and with the emphasis on the word perhaps dimensional, right? You know, talk about the high strangeness factor. And Rocky, you know, please interject. You know, let's just, you know, close this out with a little bit of a group talk about what this means for our species in the bigger picture. Sure. I've often stated the obvious. We now know through observation that space-time is indeed connected and it's flexible, and it can be warped two ways. Usually with mass, a massive object, and of course, the heavier that object is, or the more massive it is, the more it warps in the localized area space-time. And time also is warped with it. You can't separate the two. And so, is it possible where we experience time, or I'm sorry, space in a three-dimensional way? Is it possible now that we know space and time is relative, it can be compressed and stretched a bit? Is it possible that time itself can also be experienced from a three-dimensional sense, where we look at time right now as here on Earth? Time tends to be a very linear function. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow. But is it possible now that we know that space and time are connected, that it's possible where time itself could also be experienced in the three-dimensional role? So what do I mean by that? So, you and I and Rocky are having this conversation right now, but if I had the ability to even manipulate time just a little bit, if I had this conversation with you and Rocky here, but 5 minutes ago, or right here, but 5 minutes from now, we'd never see each other. Okay. It's only when I'm right here, right now with you, do our timelines match up and we can interact. But if I'm not here to have the conversation, then we're not going to have a conversation. But what if time is the same way? What if there's micro abilities? And again, this is pure speculation. But it's just one of the hypotheses where perhaps there are things that can experience time itself fundamentally different than the way we do. Rather than being a point of space-time moving forward, it's more of a range where the past, present, and future are experienced more as if it's happening now. And it's very bizarre to think of it that way, but some of the observations we're seeing with quantum physics, and especially as it deals with the electrons and whatnot, are suggesting that may very well be an accurate model for space-time at the quantum level. So again, I don't want to pontificate too much, because at the end of the day, we simply don't know. But this is why I think it's important we keep all options on the table until they're not, because we really don't know what we're dealing with. And we don't have it, but more importantly, we don't have any basis to make a judgment, a fundamental observation saying, okay, this is probably what's happening. We don't even have that. So as fun as it is to speculate, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how helpful it is, only simply because we don't have enough data. And hopefully with what we're doing now, within the next couple of years, we will have enough data where maybe we can start making some of these suggestions, right? And start going down that rabbit hole a little bit more.
Do you ever look at it, those 5 observables that you brought to all of us, made us all aware of? Do you ever look at each one of those and then tear them apart and look for, these sort of invisible observables, so to speak, of each one of those, break down each one of those pieces?
Rocky, absolutely. And that is vital, because there are sub observations within those larger categories, right, that are very helpful in us making a determination, is something conventional or is something really new, unique, and nuanced. And you're absolutely correct. And as I said before, we may find out that there's many more observables. These are just the 5 that we've really identified, but there could be 8, 10, 12. There's really no limit. The more we begin to understand this phenomenon and collect data, the more we may be surprised that there may be a lot more associated with it.
I got a feeling that this is, the tip of the proverbial iceberg, right?
So Louis, wanted to express our appreciation so much for you, for this opportunity to share this, just fascinating conversation with you. And, just to reiterate that we think that you're the real McCoy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that you are a truth teller. You're sincere, you're forthright, you're authentic, you're a one-of-a-kind American national treasure. And
you're far too kind, but I appreciate it very much. I can assure you there's people that are far more deserving in the Pentagon of that, but I appreciate it. And I think as time continues, I remain very hopeful that more information will continue to come to light. And you have my personal commitment that I'm not going to stop until we have some sort of resolution.
You know, Lou, you said earlier that, you know, you don't want to be known as that UFO guy. And I'll tell you right now, you're not actually. I think the way a lot of us view you is that soldier, that soldier right there. That's the one that's you know, fighting with us here. So it really is seen that way. You're not seen as part of some lunatic fringe, actually. So I think that's because you're the way you speak, the way you articulate, and the kind of discipline that you're showing and continue to show on this. So honest and sincere thanks for allowing so many of us to take what was almost shameful and embarrassing to talk to our family and friends about, and make it a hell of a lot easier. You kicked the door in,
Rocky
so.
and Byron, thank you for what you guys do. It's a sincere honor and pleasure of mine. You are making a difference. I'm only one voice among many, but you guys are providing a service, a very important service. And I think we owe much of the last 3 years to the efforts of folks like you doing what you do, and being courageous enough to have a conversation and put yourself out there when people are going to mock you, people are going to judge you, and you do it anyways because it's the right thing to do. So truly and humbly, thank you so much for what you guys do.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots to the west. The whole thing, dude.